Hi, I'm Joe Cuiffi from Penn State, New Kensington. I'm the program coordinator for the Electromechanical Engineering Technology program.
Hey, Jim, you're next.
And I'm Jim Smith. I'm the president and CEO of the Economic Growth Connection. We're a private nonprofit economic development agency located in Greensburg, serving Westmoreland County.
Steve?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Steve Leonard. I'm the operations and programming manager for the Digital Foundry, which is part of Penn State, New Kensington.
Bernie? Oh, Bernie, I think you're on mute.
Bernie Lynch with Factory Unlocked. Been working on startup manufacturing and most recently moving into robotics and automation as a consultant with FANUC America.
And Sherri?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sherri McCleary. I'm the executive director for the new Digital Foundry in New Kensington, which is a initiative with Penn State New Ken and the EGC that Jim represents. And I don't know what happened with Tina, but we do have Tina Giardina from Cook Medical, who is their HR specialist, and hopefully she will be able to join us shortly. But in the meantime, I want to get started as the host for our panelists today. We're going to talk about a topic today that is a pretty critical one: workforce development. It's one of the most important objectives that any region can have, any employer can have, that impacts not only the welfare of the overall economy, but it certainly impacts the welfare of individuals. When we have higher rates of employment and better paying jobs and all of those things that workforce development can help contribute to. But we also all know painfully well that finding, recruiting, capturing, and keeping talent can be extremely difficult, especially in the environment we find ourselves in right now. So we're going to talk a little bit today about workforce development, training, and challenges. And I'm sure we'll just scratch the tip of the iceberg on a topic that is on a lot of people's mind, and is also something that we could probably have discussions for many days and never come to resolution on some of the challenges. So with that, I want to start with asking our external panelists, and again, hopefully we'll get Tina back on board here, but that would be Jim and Bernie for now. When you look at some of the challenges facing business and industry today with respect to workforce development and training, in a few words, what would you describe as some of the greatest challenges that they are struggling to overcome at this point? Jim, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think right now the biggest problem is the one that's being felt all across the United States, and it's just a lack of talent that's out there. Right now, we've got demand exceeding supply by a large factor, and I think that is going to increase. Early on in the pandemic, everyone thought it was because we were paying folks to stay home, and I think they've slowly come to the realization, since we're not doing that anymore, that that's not really the case. We've seen the Great Resignation, and I think what's really driving that is more like the Great Retirement, where we see a lot of the older population that's decided after staying home or working remotely that they could do that. And of course, the market has been cooperating. The stock market's been cooperating with their 401ks, and I think driving it to levels that allow them to do that. So that combination, in conjunction with younger people finding a lot of online work, I think that's really driving a lot of this. So the biggest problem that we see, Sherri, is just a lack of supply right now.
Yeah, very good points, Jim. I think two things. One, in manufacturing, it's hard in a lot of roles to do your job from home. So that presents a challenge in the current environment. And you're right. I've said this to many people for decades. When I was in the industry, we talked about the great tsunami of retirement from the baby boomers that was coming, but we never figured out what we were going to do about it. And so now here we are, where it happened all at once. So Bernie, how about you? How would you respond to some of the greatest challenges that you think are being faced right now, particularly in the manufacturing sector?
Yeah, and I do think from a macro level, Jim really articulated, overall what's happening, in manufacturing for the last 20, 30 years, because they were dirty environments. Most of the family business part of that was, the generations that were raising their children were saying, don't do this, do something else, right? So I think even as family businesses for the last 20, 30 years, families discouraged their family members from going into manufacturing, and we're sending them to cleaner work. But I do think what's happened in the digitization of manufacturing, and that's been coming in the same time period, but the adoption rates have been slower. And so a lot of our work in, say, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, in training companies and their workers from the difference between manual machining in the digitization early stage, we oftentimes ended up training a whole new set of employees and new hires, because you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So unfortunately, in order for these companies to compete, they had to get more competitive. They had to get digitization, automation, systems, and often, not always, that meant training new hires. And then it became us against them, where we saw digital systems running 2-3 shifts, whereas the manual systems were still running 1 shift. But the price points, the competitiveness of those manufacturers were greater, in those who were moving into digital environments and now into robotic and automation environments. So I do think it's, you need less people now in a digital environment, but the skill set is a lot of pre-hire training is required, which is, does this individual have the aptitude and ability for digitization, as opposed to just a manual hardware side? There's got to be a hardware software side to digitization, which is a whole different skill set. And it means that you're looking at a different kind of training model and a different kind of person for who wants to work in those environments. So I think all of that, defining, recruiting, sharing with families what that looks like, so that they know it, they can safely send their children into these environments. I think those are all the key challenges that you're seeing in manufacturing.
Right, great, well put, Bern, and I agree. I mean, everyone we talked to is, from a manufacturing standpoint, is looking at how do they move into this space of more digitization. They're saying, while it might eliminate the need for as much manual labor, it often leads to business growth, which then leads to jobs being added. And the only thing standing between them and growth right now is the labor shortage. And one way to deal with that labor shortage is to bring in more technology. So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing there, but it's really is key to growth. So Jim, with that question specifically for you, as we look at the Westmoreland County overall kind of workforce goals and strategies, and some of the things that were in like the Reimagine Westmoreland County Comprehensive Plan, how do you see manufacturing being critical to the economy in this region in Western Pennsylvania, and how much is the workforce going to be a factor in meeting some of those goals for our region?
Well, Westmoreland County still has a greater percentage of manufacturing than does the rest of the region, which has a greater percentage than the rest of the state. So, we're still a place that makes things. And that's fantastic. And people who have come to, my meetings or, have heard me speak have probably heard it before, but, we're really blessed to have a lot of these factories, because factories are great, big, expensive places that hate to move. And that's awesome as long as you've got them. But when you lose them for good, right? They don't come back. So the challenge, as we try and bridge the gap between all of those things that Bernie was talking about, and that you've talked about, Sherri, with digitization, and Steve, Joe, as we try to get there from here, is to make sure that we're not losing what we currently have, right? So there is this great sort of tendency to want to try to leapfrog, but that's a difficult proposition to do with a workforce and existing companies. Real growth has always, in economic development, it always is 80% from the companies that you currently have. It doesn't come from, companies that are magically appearing or startups. They add to the longer term, but growth in the shorter and intermediate term happens from your existing base of companies. So it's incumbent upon all of us to help those companies along, right? To help them get into the fourth industrial revolution, to add the digitization, to find the workforce that they need, because those transitions are slow as well. Sherri, from your background, adding that type of technology for a big company even, it takes time. That's not something that happens overnight. And there's a great expense. And smaller companies that might be faced with that challenge might not have access to capital, might not have access to knowledge, might not have access to the type of workforce that's needed to help them make that transition. So all of those are supports that need to be put into place to help our existing companies, get to that point where they can then participate in the fourth industrial revolution as well. The comprehensive plan that you referenced, which was a joint project between the county, the Chamber of Commerce, and EGC, looked at ways that we can augment our workforce through investments that the county is going to be making over the next 10 years. So it was a whole new way of looking at comprehensive plans. It was something that hasn't been done before. We viewed everything through the lens of workforce. What can we do to attract and retain a new group of people to be here? And I think if you have a chance, check it out, Reimagining Our Westmoreland. There's a bunch of great strategies, and we're currently in the phase of recruiting strategy champions and putting those initial pieces into place. So a lot of good stuff in there.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jim. I think you hit on a lot of really good points about both supporting our installed base that's already here, in a lot of cases providing great jobs for decades, while we look to how we get the next generation ready to be a part of our workforce. And that's a good lead into my question for you, Bernie. One thing you did not mention, Bernie, is that you are also the founder and CEO of Factory Unlocked. And you were very involved in successfully launching some apprentice type of programs and workforce training. And you are now doing a lot of consulting, not only regionally, but across the country on the deployment of workforce training, particularly in robotics and automation. So with that experience, I wanted to ask you, when you look at programs who are successfully addressing some of the gaps we talked about, what do they bring, or what do they have in common? What makes for a good, successful workforce development program versus, the flavor of the day that might come and go?
Yeah, and I appreciate that question and the reference to apprenticeship. Being here in Southwest Pennsylvania and in the Westmoreland County area, right, I worked with the heavy equipment operating engineers and their apprentice program, and for 5 years. And a lot of the work I did was write curricula for next generation technology to teach, if you're going to have robotic systems or RFPs from the state for best stormwater management practices, or you need to run biodiesel in your equipment, how do you train for biodiesel for your mechanics, as well as, running a full fleet on biodiesel if it's in an RFP in a response to a construction site. So I would say the unions taught me about apprenticeship, and I worked with several of them. And I think in large measure, in learning the apprentice model, I was really impressed with the idea that several hundred employers would team together and develop a cooperative training system, which is what apprenticeship is. And, I think that model really convinced me that that is the right model, which is how do you directly team, your training organizations, your education organizations into a collective cohort of companies and in that model. And, so I do think, the apprentice model, and it's not one that has been favored in this country because it is seen as union only. But I've worked with the US Department of Labor as a manufacturing apprenticeship subject matter expert and helped develop programs in manufacturing apprenticeship in several parts of the United States. And I still think that's a great model, but I think oftentimes I've literally worked with hundreds of colleges and universities who have said, how do we develop these kind of models? And I think, it's, as you know, we created a program called Makership, which was not an apprenticeship placement, but a makership placement. And that concept of, how do we create a new glossary of terms for the work we're doing? We don't have words today, nor do we have occupations that have names of the future occupations. And I think some level of focusing on how we speak about this future work, how do we create it as a more attractive dynamic, and how do we engage people where we're not using terms of tradition, but we use terms of the future to describe what this work actually will be and what it is. But I think, that's been an exercise I've long done and want to keep doing. And I've tried working with the US Department of Labor on new occupations that we can create as national standards, even in competencies, so that they can be widely understood by employers, by the education system, as well as individuals who may in fact want to go be those things. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in what I call a vocabulary and a glossary of terms for next generation manufacturing and what we're going to call it.
Okay, yeah, great. I think you're right, Bernie. We don't know what to even call some of these things that we're trying to create for the future. You talked a little bit about the kind of importance of that connectivity of the educators to industry, and that's a great lead into now talking with our inside panelists, because that was the whole genesis for the Digital Foundry, is to start to bring that bridge between academia and educators and industry and the workforce. So that's not always been an easy bridge to cross. There's often been a divide between what is typically traditionally covered in academia and their position versus what industry needs may be. So we're trying to look at that. How do we bridge that gap? How do we get all the voices at the table and not just be like two ships passing in the night when we're all trying to work towards the same goals? So with that, I'm going to ask the first question of Joe. Joe, you are inside an academic role, but you have also been very focused with your program, the EMET program. It's a very kind of pragmatic application of technologies in industry. And in particular, you've spent some time developing our Factory 4.0 or smart manufacturing project and curriculum. So talk a little bit about that program and how you think it helps to start dividing or covering that divide a little bit between academia and industry, and helping to prepare students as well as the workforce for next generation jobs.
Great, thanks. And I appreciate all the comments from Jim and Bernie thus far. When we talk about sort of 4-year undergraduate education with engineering in particular, it sort of evolves. And when you think about it, engineering and teaching an engineer, a lot of things have stayed the same. The fundamental physical principles that we have to convey to these students. And of course, when you're working on a manufacturing floor, that's just about everything. That's mechanical stuff, electrical stuff, all of that. But it starts to creep with tools available. If I even just think of the use of software, right? In the 80s, we're teaching everyone engineering, but then we're also making sure they can use Excel and word processing. And then perhaps moved on to everyone needs to know how to program. Oh, we're going to program this, I program that. Better learn programming languages, and we just keep stuffing more and more into the curriculum. And now I see that evolve into, okay, you have to be able to use spreadsheets, you have to be able to program just about anything. And also, we really need you to start analyzing data and big data analytics and all this stuff that everyone's doing. And it's at some point, something's got to give. I see challenges there, but also opportunities. I think it refocuses us as educators. One, we always are tempted to listen and try to respond to, hey, they need trained on this piece of equipment now, or they need this programming language X. And we get that, but also that isn't our goal. Our goal has to be teaching them fundamentals and teaching them how to learn and adapt in their work environment. I mean, from my point of view, being in industry, before I came to academia, I just want to hire people that can figure things out and learn on the fly so that they can pick up any technology we throw at them. So to do that, and that's hard to teach. We always talk about critical thinking skills in academia, but it's hard to teach. What can we do? Well, we try to expose them to the technologies available and let them solve problems or come up with ideas. So yes, they have to have the foundation, but we also want to show them what's possible and let them run with it. So for example, you mentioned the smart manufacturing curriculum. We worked on that project with MIT, sponsored by SESME, the Smart Manufacturing Institute, to develop a set of curriculum to show people what's possible. And then involves a demo piece of equipment that we can retrofit, we can collect data on, and we can try to improve it, not just with our engineering know-how that we have, but also with looking at data, doing data intensive activities that range everything from visualizing and contextualizing the data all the way through some machine learning as it's applied to making it better. And just to give them a taste and show them what's possible, I think really gives them something to take forward to their employer, something where they can see what's coming and try to figure it out and help the employer, because we don't know what they need to do with their job, and their employers know their business best. But so sort of a long-winded answer to that question, we have to continually teach them to be adaptable and pick up what they need.
No, that's a great answer, Joe. From my own personal experience, I couldn't agree with you more. Over my career, I was constantly relearning new technologies and new ideas, but that foundation of knowing how to use technologies as a tool, critically think through how you problem solve and leverage technology to help you do that. Those are things that will never go away. So very well put. So I think then that transitions to you, Steve. Joe talked a bit about how we're engaging the students and incorporating some of this content with respect to our more traditional university students and engineering fields in particular. But we've also been looking at and developing and already deploying some of this content that Joe mentioned, as well as other things for workforce training for incumbent workers to increase their skill sets, improve their earning potential, but also for people who are looking to be new entrants to manufacturing. So how do these things fit in with some of the workforce goals you've heard talked about today? And maybe talk a little bit about how businesses could start to leverage some of these things to help with onboarding or improving their current employee development.
Mm-hmm. No, that'd be great. Thank you. Building on what Jim and Bernie and Joe said, there's definitely a dearth or a gap in the talent that manufacturing businesses are looking for. I think one of the biggest things that are contributing to this, we're all aware of, is COVID. We talked about the Great Resignation. But another one that we sometimes lose sight of is the United States and manufacturers have been, over the last 40 years, shifting manufacturing overseas. I think the big wake-up call happened, I would say, summer of our first year of COVID, 2020, when the supply chain basically broke down. And eventually CEOs and people in the C-suite realized we can't abdicate our manufacturing overseas if this sort of kind of thing happens again. So you're not seeing it just yet, but you're seeing rumblings and hints of companies looking to bring manufacturing back to the United States. And a part of that is also, okay, we can't do it the way we used to. We have to think about what is the new manufacturing paradigm that we're going into, which is digital manufacturing, smart manufacturing, AKA Industry 4.0. So, since the onset of COVID, availability of workers has plummeted, especially those with relevant experience. And these manufacturing businesses are struggling to find staff just to meet their workforce needs, as we're all aware. The entry-level positions, they're really having a hard time finding people with the bare minimum training to come on board and fill that talent gap. Many manufacturing businesses struggle hiring people with little to no experience in manufacturing because it often negatively impacts their productivity. They have to have their staff work with them to get them, the new hires up to speed, and that really impacts their ability to get work out the door. Our level 1 training, which is manufacturing and digital fundamentals, is targeted for individuals that are entry level or have little to no manufacturing experience. And it provides a means to train individuals on those manufacturing basics, quality, safety, digital manufacturing building blocks. So they understand the manufacturing concepts when entering the workforce. And that's one of the biggest things that businesses have said to us. We've interviewed several dozen companies over the past year, probably more than that. They said, if I could get somebody in that has 20%, 30% of the understanding of what manufacturing is, that's a big, big difference as opposed to somebody with none. So the other important element of our training is really providing those personal or professional interpersonal skills and problem-solving critical thinking skills. And we do that in context with the technical training because they all go together. You can't just teach technical by itself and expect, and they'll know how to interface with somebody else. We want to do it in context. And it's something that companies have lamented to us that is lacking in the workforce that they've been interviewing today. The other thing companies can benefit from the kind of training that we provide, especially on our level 1 training, and we have others too, is onboard training for new employees, as I said, but we can also make it available for businesses for complementing professional development training for current employees. I think that could be very beneficial for them. Kind of getting up to speed with some of the new things in digital communication. That's a big gap that we are starting to see. And can also be a great vehicle to get current employees upskilled in the building blocks of digital manufacturing and setting them up to help in transitioning a company towards digital, because you're starting to see more and more companies recognizing this. We have an intermediate and advanced level training. Joe talked about that advanced level training that was developed in concert with SESME and MIT. And we've heard repeatedly from companies, they're looking for staff that have that digital manufacturing background or awareness. So that will enable them as a company to transform their manufacturing operations into this digital reality we're faced with. They really understand and recognize that this is a growing need in manufacturing if you want to be competitive. And providing these levels of training from basic, fundamental to intermediate to advanced really creates a nice pipeline for companies to be able to have their staff and their workers go through and integrate a lot of the technologies that are a part of the workforce development approach that the county and universities and companies are looking for. I think that's pretty much the key elements I wanted to share.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Yeah, so put another shameless plug in for what we're doing with Digital Foundry. Steve said we've got level 1, the kind of that entry level, we're calling it digital manufacturing fundamentals. And then we have a level 2, which is our digital manufacturing essentials for people who are already on the shop floor. And our level 3, our digital manufacturing professional, that's for engineers and technical professionals. But I also want to mention, and Bernie was a big part of our extended team on this, we received a grant to add to our portfolio of Digital Foundry training specifically on robotics programming, PLC programming, some automation content, and partnering with PSNK and Rockwell, who are some of the largest suppliers of some of that content in North America and globally. So that will be training that we will be getting the equipment in shortly, and we will be rolling that training out later this year. And it also comes with industry credentialing associated with that. So one last question that any of you can kind of jump in here, and then I want to open it up to questions from our attendees. But we've talked a lot about workforce training. We've talked about university engagement, but what we have missed, we've mentioned several times, the pipeline for employees in the workforce. We are also engaging pretty heavily already through Penn State, New Ken, and the Digital Foundry with some of our K through 12 educators. So speak a little bit to how we could better improve that connection between the starting point of the pipeline, which is our K through 12 school districts, and making that connection to next level training, whether that be the trades, whether that be four-year degrees, or the connections to industry and their needs. So does anybody have any thoughts on that? You want to jump in before we go to questions?
Yeah, I'll make this brief, but one thing that you look at is the demographics. We look at the Great Resignation. A lot of people are getting ready to reevaluate what they want to do with their lives. Many are retiring, but we still have a very large demographic of young people. And workers that are moving on need to be replaced. The gap that we have, digital manufacturing will be appealing to younger generation as it involves many of the digital technologies and that we see in mobile devices and computers. The younger crowd, Gen Y, Gen Z, they eat this stuff up. And these are the kind of skills that are now being adopted at the grade school level or the primary school level. And you're starting to see that coming out through some of the STEM programs, some of the more formalized classes in high school. This is a great opportunity to really make aware and insert the manufacturing elements of digital manufacturing into this so that students can see, hey, this is where I can use my skill sets, and it looks like a great field to get involved with. It's not dirty like it used to be. So I think that's a place to start.
Well, I'll jump on and add to that. I think it's all about familiarity and also about providing pathways, right? I mean, so we talk about how we get young kids into these careers, but as we've talked about here today, there are careers that we want to get them into that may not exist yet or are just beginning. So how do we communicate that? How do we share, what opportunities are out there, and then provide that set of directions on how you get from A to B, whether that's through a trade school or a community college or on to higher ed or straight into the workforce. And I think that those are all critical things. And there's a couple of organizations throughout the region working on them, ABC Create being one, the Workforce Forum being another. And, those organizations have a little bit different goal, but I think are aimed at the same result, and that's to better align education and industry. And one of the things that we haven't even touched on today is sort of the emergence of some of these new industries in the region: autonomous vehicles, robotics, etc. And then also, probably more importantly, in a short-term pinch for talent, is the impact of things like Amazon. Coming in and building large warehouses where they become the apex predator and will just pay what they need to pay. And the impact of those facilities on the local job markets cannot be ignored. As we regularly hear people coming in to interview for jobs saying, well, we want $35, even though we don't have $35 an hour, even though we don't have any skills, because I can go to Amazon and I'll get 25. So if you want me, then you're going to have to pay more. And, so you've got the convergence of a whole lot of things, and then directionless parents and students, because nobody's laid out that, that path for them to follow yet. So that's something that we're all in the process of trying to do, but it's going to take a little bit of time.
And I just, in following up with what Jim just said, I mean, that's why I'm on the automation bandwagon. Some states have created automation as a second language, and everything you just talked about, Jim, whether it's autonomous vehicles, autonomous air, water, land, sea, under, background, that's kind of the universe I came from in working with some of the startups out of CMU, was more the autonomous systems, but industrial automation, home automation, the key word here is they're automated systems, and we will have an automated future. So when we try to guide families and youth into what is that future, we know it's going to be an automated future. So to me, the development of those skills in an early stage, understanding and laying that groundwork, I almost feel like it's definitely time for an education revolution from, the little bits of, hey, we got a STEM program. Hey, we have a 3D printer. Like, I feel like I was in the early part of doing that for the last 20 years when, I was trying to convince Department of Labor that a 3D printing tech would be a legitimate occupation. And they just kept saying, well, that's never going to happen, And so I feel like I've been in the trenches of these emerging occupations enough to know that we should be laying this down at a grade school level, but we should be speaking in that overarching language of what we know is it's going to be an automated future for us all, no matter what it is, right? So I do think if we can lay foundations of the common path is that skill set, what does that mean in hardware and software, in data analytics and AI and machine learning, all the things that you're going to have to know, but it is about let's reinvent the way we look at education in an automated world.
Yeah.
So
Good, well put, Bernie. An automated world, digital world. Point is, I mean, in our personal lives, we've come to expect that every product we buy is somehow going to be connected, right? That your refrigerator is connected to the internet. Your house is vacuumed by an automated robot. Your watch is smart. Your car is smart. We had one of our students, his tennis shoes were smart. Why you need to connect your tennis shoes directly to the internet is beyond me, but the point is, where everything's moving that way. So how do we make sure that people understand this is not just the future and this is not just something that could be, this is what we're living right now. And it's going to only continue to move into everything we do. And I agree, we're kind of at the point where we're in the midst of an industrial revolution, and there needs to be, to some extent, an educational revolution that goes hand in hand with that. So any last comments? We do want to open it up and see if there's any questions. Corinne's saying we don't have any submitted in the chat, but if we have someone in the audience that wants to ask a question, Corinne, can they ask that verbally, or no, they don't have audio? They don't have audio or chat. What the heck? We are obviously having a technical difficulty.
I have a
Sherri, if I
question
might-
for Joe.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
Building on what Sherri said, you're very much deeply working in the university system at Penn State, New Kensington. I mean, what are your thoughts around the evolution of education at the college level relative to this?
Well, it's interesting, like
industrial
I said,
revolution?
you tend to have a scope creep when it comes to technologies available. You have to sort of be ready for anything, but the fundamentals haven't changed. You still need to teach people engineering in a way. But also, I think there's also a bit of a gap in that oftentimes people expect the younger generations coming in to know certain things, to know programming, to know Excel. And I think that's a bit of a mistake. I think, yes, some may have been exposed in K through 12 education, but that's not necessarily so. Their exposure to digital has been a little bit different. I think they more come in with a mindset of what is possible, but the behind the scenes is often hidden. It's still tough. That's why it's hard. It's work. But at least they have that excitement, and you can use that to engender effort and passion in something. So there's a lot out there to show them, if that makes sense. And Bernie, you've seen a lot of this. So
absolutely. And I think, the difference between the words education as opposed to specific skills training, and that disconnect that we've had over a number of years of, what is the role of our education system? It's to educate, have an educated populace, as opposed to, what are the very specific skills that industries value? And then that disconnect is, what's been identified. And I would say that, I know that the federal government has been putting out a lot of grant funding to try to convince primarily community colleges as well as university systems to more align with teaching the skills that industry needs, no matter what they are. But I do think the revolution in education may have to come with a mindset that says, what does an educated populace mean to us in the future? Is it English literature from the 18th century? And I do think, that whole question, it is a philosophical one, but I know in the training program we developed, our key question was, how do we create a value proposition for an individual that might say, in this current economy, what is my value proposition to society in a way that I'm willing to, get paid to do X, just like you would have a startup ask the same question. So individuals can come to that question and say, what is my economic value in society, as opposed to, what it is I want to do, and then how do you reconcile the two? But I think that that can be a guiding question that we don't really do in education. And I think it could be a good question. It's actually why I'm such a big fan of what the Digital Foundry is. I think the Digital Foundry is working at a university and high school connected level with industry to figure that out. And it is meant to be that, next step of how do you start turning more toward it. At least that's what my view of, why I'm such a huge fan of the Digital Foundry is teaching industry training and the skills needed more directly to support local industry.
So we do have a question that Corinne passed along to us. We're still having some problems with people connecting here, but she asks, what can displaced workers or those wanting to enter a more technical field do to prepare themselves? And sometimes it can be intimidating and they may feel that they can't or don't have the time to do it. So what suggestions or advice might you have for someone who maybe thinks they're interested and is intimidated by the idea?
Well, let me answer that question from the perspective of the Digital Foundry. We recognize that sometimes when you want to get into a technical field, you go to a local community college and they're great. It takes a lot of time and effort to commit to that. With the training we're providing, we're trying to do that in a compressed time frame. And a level 1 training, if you have limited technical know-how, is really, you don't have to have a college education to go through this. We're trying to expose you to the applied concepts and fundamentals of manufacturing that you can learn in a matter of 90 days, once a week, and it's usually kind of scheduled in the 3:30 to 7 time frame, so we don't want to eat in on your work day. We're trying to be sensitive to all those things so that we can give you a chance to take that first step. And I think once you take that first step, it can lead and open the door to many other steps that you can take. And that's our commitment. We really want to make that kind of experience and training available to those that really want to try it in a way that's not intimidating. And it's very what you would call interactive, almost apprenticeship oriented style training in a way.
And I think that also, like I said, Steve, could lead to other pathways. It might lead you to community college or a four-year engineering degree, but it's a starting point. And we need people for industry to be successful. We need good people at all of those levels. So, okay, well, we unfortunately are not able to get any other questions. Any last comments from our panelists? I would like to thank them all very much for their time, but any last comments? So, burning issues you need to get out? Okay, but we thank you all for your time, and I think you brought some great thought-provoking comments today. And this is a big part of what we're all about, is wanting to be a resource to help our region to deal with some of these struggles that are always going to be a struggle, but we want to be a resource to help. So I thank all of the talent on the phone. I thank those who joined us, and please stay connected with us at the Digital Foundry as more information is coming on all of the events on the horizon in 2022, including a lot of the training we talked about today. So thank you all. Have a great day. Stay warm, stay healthy. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thanks, Sherri.
Sherri.